are these people?
As I said, Bernie is proposing to increase the federal minimum wage to $17 an hour. So hold on, there we go. So as reported by Common Dreams by our friend, well, not yet. We'll probably have him on the show eventually. Jake Johnson. He writes, to end disgrace of poverty wages, Sanders' bill would hike federal minimum wage to $17. The overwhelming majority of Americans support raising the minimum wage to a living wage. Now, I think here, I'm not sure if he intended to write that, but hold on to that because I'm actually going to get into that a little bit more in terms of what Bernie is proposing and why I think this sucks. Anyway, so Jake reports, decrying the national disgrace of poverty wages in the world's richest country, allegedly, Senator Bernie Sanders on Thursday introduced legislation that would raise the federal minimum wage to $17 an hour over a period of 5 years. Sanders, the chair of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, lamented that Congress hasn't raised the federal minimum wage in more than a decade, leaving tens of millions of workers with what the senator described as starvation wages. Now is the time to raise the minimum wage, Sanders said at a Capitol Hill press conference alongside union members and service workers. Let's be clear, this is not a radical idea. The overwhelming majority of Americans support raising the minimum wage to a living wage. It is not acceptable today that nearly 35 million American workers earn less than $17 an hour, the senator added. Sanders pledged to push his legislation as quickly and as hard as possible in the Senate, where the bill faces long odds given likely opposition from several members of the chamber's Democratic caucus and every Republican. The Senate Health Committee will hold a markup hearing for the legislation on June 14th, Sanders announced last week. The full text of the bill is not yet available, so we'll probably try, if we get our hands on it, to report on that. But anyway, Mary Kay Henry, president of the SEIU, said during Thursday's press conference that we are going to be watching any congressperson, senator, or in the House that dares to say that they are not going to vote yes for Senator Sanders' bill. They must be held accountable at the ballot box, said Henry. That sounds like something.
Yep.
And you guys are very smart, so I think you can probably know what we're kind of talking about.
Yep.
But we'll continue. More than a decade has passed since Congress had last raised the federal minimum wage, and efforts in recent years to enact a $15 an hour wage floor nationally have fallen short amidst opposition from the GOP, corporate-friendly Democrats, and the business lobby.
That was me. Sorry.
While some lawmakers are sure to balk at the idea of more than doubling the federal minimum wage, a working paper released this week showed that counties that have enacted large minimum wage increases have seen high employment, high wages for workers, and lower inequity. No one in this country can survive on $7.25 an hour, Sanders said Thursday. Maybe some of my colleagues in Congress might want to live for a month on $7.25 an hour and see what that's like. As Congress has failed to act, many states, cities, and counties across the U.S. have raised their minimum wage substantially, but progress is continuing this year. According to a recent report by the National Employment Law Project, a record 86 U.S. jurisdictions are set to raise their minimum wages this year. But 15 states have their minimum wages set at the federal floor as $7.25 an hour, according to Economic Policy Institute's minimum wage tracker, and 5 other states have no minimum wage laws, meaning the federal minimum applies.
Yep.
As it becomes more and more expensive to get by in America, $15 is no longer an adequate goal. We need to go higher to reflect what it actually costs to live in America. Hold on to that thought.
In a bit.
We'll go over it. In an analysis earlier this year, EPI estimated that a worker in one of the 20 states with a $7.25 minimum wage is 46% more likely to make less than $15 an hour than a worker in the other 30 states or District of Columbia with higher minimum wages. There's no part of this country where even a single adult without children can achieve an adequate standard of living with a wage of less than $15 an hour, EPI noted. With a lack of congressional action, the federal minimum wage has lost more than a third of its value since its inflation-adjusted high point of 1968. Sanders said Thursday that with living costs rising across the country, a $15 minimum wage would still be insufficient, a point that supporters of the new legislation echoed. As it becomes more and more expensive to get by in America, $15 is no longer an adequate goal. Stephen Prince, vice chair of the Patriotic Millionaires, said in the statement, that's almost seems like an oxymoron, but whatever.
Yeah.
We need to go higher to reflect on what it actually costs to live in America. Sanders is right to revise his minimum wage push to $17 an hour to save workers across the country from further suffocation. Any thoughts before I get into this and why I think this sucks?
I mean, I probably could guess that it's because 17 isn't nearly enough even then, like to reach minimum wage standards of a living wage, right? Like,
Mhm.
you know, so like the patriotic millionaires is definitely an oxymoron. But yeah, I mean, this seems like
Uh,
lip service because he's not going to be able to get this passed anyway.
right.
So we'll see.
So, yeah. So I'm actually going to do some quick math. I should have done this beforehand. So, assuming if you,
Tied to
assuming
inflation.
if this goes through,
Okay.
um, so that's a yearly salary of about just over $35,000 a year. Okay.
Yeah.
So, question is, in this economy and these times, who can live on $35,000 a year?
Not many.
Not many. And I'm not sure if Jake did this on purpose. Uh, but in the beginning and in the middle of the article, he mentioned that people are looking for a living wage.
Yes.
Um, and I'm going to get into why that's significant versus, and I'm sure you guys know this, but this is just kind of the tactic that just to kind of show that Bernie is actually not necessarily working in good faith here. But if we can go to the slides again. Oh, actually, I'm that's more of an article. But you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I think we got the point, so I'm not going to read that. Um, I pulled this, and I forgot the website that I pulled this from. I should have put that in my notes. Um, but it clearly talks about what is a minimum wage versus a living wage.
Yeah.
According to the article, people are looking for an increase in a living wage. So I'll have to find this article later, and I'll probably tell you guys in the chat and in the description after this. But according to this article, the defining living wage, also known as the livable wage, is the income required to cover basic family needs without reliance on outside assistance. So basically, loans. So really, when we talk about living wage, that doesn't account to the fact that many of us, especially if you're a millennial, whatever, especially if you've gone to college, more likely you're going to have some loans.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily accounting into what people will want as a living wage. So basically, a living wage is what the basic, having money to cover the basics. So calculating living costs helps communities and policymakers better understand how much families must earn to maintain self-sufficiency and a minimum standard of living. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Basic needs include food, housing, transportation, insurance, utilities, childcare, taxes, and inflation. However, other expenses such as vacation, dining out, and savings are typically not included. So, as I said, this just includes things to live at a minimum level, at least comfortably, like the basics. All right.
Yep.
Um, The living wage should not be confused with the minimum wage. This is what Sanders is proposing, which is the minimum that an employer by law can pay an employee for an hour of labor. In contrast, a living wage is determined by the cost of covering basic needs in a particular area. So, difference is living wage is kind of more socialist in scope, basically, right? Whereas a minimum wage is tied to the employers. So the idea that Bernie is suggesting that $17 an hour is enough in this day and age is stupid.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I'm said that Bernie is not working in good faith here, because as I said, who can live on $35,000 a year in this day and age? Anyway, the U.S. Congress established a minimum wage in 1938 to provide a living wage. However, because the policy has not kept pace with inflation, the federal minimum wage fails to provide a minimum standard of living in many areas. Currently, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. A full-time worker making the minimum wage would earn $15,000 a year, just slightly above the $13,590 poverty guidelines for individuals. For workers providing for family members, earnings from a full-time minimum wage job would fall below the federal poverty line.
Right.
30 U.S. states currently have a minimum wage above the federal minimum. The District of Columbia has the highest minimum wage at $15.20. Wyoming and Georgia tie for the lowest minimum wage at $5.15. I made that in high school.
Yeah.
This was back in the late 90s, though.
Yeah. Florida used to be like 7, and then they finally changed it.
Right. Recently.
Right.
Or at least it's going to be changed.
Yeah, it's going up to like 10.
Right.
You know?
But the plan is 5.15 within the next few years, correct? Because
I think, yeah.
Yeah. Because that was a ballot initiative in Florida.
Yeah. Roger Meadows would be happy.
Right. Meanwhile, the living wage for an individual in DC is $20.80 an hour. That seems low, but while the living wage for an individual in Georgia is around $15.99. So, so I pulled up some states here, just to give you an idea of the minimum wage and what should be the
living wage.
Living wage, right? So DC, where I live, living wage for an individual is $20.80. Living wage for a family of 4 is $27 an hour. The minimum wage here is $15.20. The District of Columbia has the highest livable wage for an individual at $20.80 an hour, or $43,258 a year. That's low. I'll say that right now. That's low as hell. A family of 4 with 2 working adults requires $112,551 annually to maintain a minimum standard of living. Housing in DC is among the nation's most expensive, costing an individual over $18,000 a year. Childcare is also costly, setting a family of 4 back $22,492 a year, more than the same family's annual housing costs. Right? So, point being, very expensive. Minimum wage does not account for the living wage here. So basically, it's too low, even for 15. Let's go to New York. So, living wage for an individual, $20 an hour. A living wage for a family of 4 is $26.50 an hour. The minimum wage there currently is $13.20 an hour. So New York has one of the highest costs of living for an individual, primarily due to housing costs. The average person in the state will spend at least $16,000 annually on housing, while family of 4 will spend over $20,000. New Yorkers require $20.05 an hour, or $41,700 annually, to maintain a minimum standard of living. Again, that's low. New York's families need $2,650 or $110,225 annually to apply for a family of 4 with 2 working adults. The same family spends $23,000 on childcare and over $18,000 in taxes. Whew.
Yep.
So that's New York. Massachusetts. Living wage
1991.
19, just under 20.
Yeah.
Living wage for a family for $29 an
30.
hour. And minimum wage there currently is 14, just over 14.
Yeah.
So Massachusetts frequently ranks among the best states to live in. Can you zoom out, please?
Yes, sorry.
Yes, especially, but the price of entry is steep. The living wage for an individual is just under $20 an hour, or $41,416 a year. Of that, over $16,000 will be spent on housing alone. The living wage for a family of 4 is just under $30 an hour, or $121,414 a year, the nation's highest. Of that, $19,000 will go to taxes, and over $22,000 will be spent on housing. Childcare will cost $31,879 a year, the highest cost in Jesus Christ.
Yep.
All right. So these are the top 3 states in terms of cost of living. But Collin, you may ask, what about the poorest?
Collin, what about the poorest, Collin?
We got that too. We got
Cool.
that too. They're not, well, these are among the bottom of the list. But even here, you'll see something that is
South
significant
Dakota.
here. Right. Living wage for an individual, just under $14 an hour. Living wage for family of 4 is 20, and currently the minimum wage is just under $10 an hour.
Yeah.
South Dakota has the lowest minimum wage for individuals, requiring $13.87 an hour, or $28,853 a year. The state's housing costs are among the lowest in the nation, sending individual back $6,784 a year. Family 4 with 2 working parents will spend just over $9,000 a year on housing and $15,000 on childcare. They will require $20 an hour, or $83,274 a year to maintain a minimum standard of living.
Someone should probably do the math on like where the living wage is like the lowest, but the minimum wage is the highest. Like that ratio of like, so like if you wanted to move, like which state has the best ratio on that,
I could probably figure out that math, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, there's 50 states to look through,
Right. Let's look at Kentucky. Living wage, $14. Living wage for a family 4 is 20, and the minimum wage currently is $7.25.
Right.
So living wage, so just under
29,000 a year.
Housing costs just under 7,000 a year. Annually spend just over 9,000 on housing, under 13,000 on transportation, and under 15
on childcare.
For childcare. Okay.
Okay.
Let's look at one more. Mississippi. If it's probably at the bottom, one at the bottom, if not the bottom.
Oh, for sure. Always.
Living wage for individual, 14. Okay. Living wage for family 4 is $19 an hour.
Still under 20, like just under.
Still under 20, right? Yeah. So minimum wage, $7.25.
Yeah.
Right. Mississippi has one of the lowest living costs in the country, but it also regularly ranks one of the worst states to live in.
Yep.
To maintain a living wage, an individual will need to make $14.20 an hour, or just over $29 a year. A family 4 requires $19 an hour, or over 80K a year.
Yeah.
Childcare costs are low, costing the same family just over $10,000 a year. Housing is also cheap at just over $9,000 annually.
I mean, that
Okay.
also depends on where you are in Mississippi
Right.
too. Like, if you're in
Mhm.
Biloxi, yes. If you're in
Right.
like the middle of Nowheresville, like you're not gonna have any resources to buy anyway. Like,
Right.
so you're not gonna be able to get your kid to a hospital, or you know what I mean? Like, so that cost is like secret cost that isn't added up, you know?
Right.
So
But the point is, all of this kind of shows the moral of the story is what Bernie is proposing is shit.
even in
Right.
Mississippi, for a family of 4, you're not covering that.
Right.
You're barely
$17.
over an individual living wage in Mississippi there.
Right. So 17 just across the board, depending on the state, is
Yeah.
not nearly enough at
Yeah.
all. And I was talking with Indy about this like over the weekend when I pulled this article. And he was like, really, ideally, really the fight for 15 really has been bullshit this whole time. And I think we've said this on the show before.
Yeah.
Really, people should have been fighting for $30 an hour, right from the jump at least, but being able to compromise there to go down. So maybe it'd be more realistic now to be pushing for, or at least the compromise position to be like around 20.
Yeah.
You could say at this point. But Bernie, and we've
Tennessee
seen
is
him do.
18
Oh yeah,
for a family of 4.
right,
Like 78 a year. Like that's no chump change either for the lowest living wage for a family of 4. So,
yeah.
and what's Bernie
Um,
asking for? 32-hour work week
well,
petition?
yeah. So this is the other thing that Indy pulled for me. So this is the other thing that Bernie is now proposing is, like a 32-hour work week, but even then, that's just kind of really shit
Yes.
because
If you're working per hour
proposing
at
if
minimum
you're working
wage.
per hour, right?
Yeah.
If it got increased to
So
17, but
32, do the math. 32 for
mhm.
a week times 17 is how much a
Hold on,
week?
32
Uh,
times
do
17,
do 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 do.
just over $500
Okay, so you
times
times that
52,
by
52.
4, right? So
That's less.
yeah,
That's just 28,000 a year.
which doesn't
So
even make Mississippi's, right? What was Mississippi's? If I go back for a yearly, 29,
29.
right? So somewhere our math ain't adding up, you know?
Right. The math ain't mathing. So yeah, so Bernie is shit on 2 things. Well, technically 3 things. Number 1, proposing a $17 minimum wage, which is not going to pass.
Yeah.
Number 1. So the idea, like he's doing this now when Republicans have control of the House, is just
I mean,
dumbassery to me.
it feels like all
But
these crumbs are adding up to moldy bread. That's
right.
that's what it seems like.
Honestly, I just feel like Bernie is doing this to kind of appease Biden, just to kind of give the illusion that Biden is actually trying to do
Trying,
shit.
yeah.
So, so that's kind of where I think this is kind of
Well,
coming from,
it's also
but
coming
two,
up to election cycle. We got to have the Democrats appear benevolent,
right.
So
So, but the idea, like, you're trying to raise the minimum wage, but lessen the work week,
terrible.
yeah, it's so,
I
and
mean, not that
then
I get both things, but you got to do the math right to be like, okay, if we're only going to work a 32-hour work week, what should be the minimum wage? And then shoot for that. If you're not going to get it, you're not going to get the other one
right.
either.
But
So
But the thing is, I think just in the article, and I think this is something that I want our audience to take away. We really should be talking about a minimum wage at all. We really should be talking about a living wage. What is like? That's what really people. That's really should be the grand prize of it all. It's like we should be demanding a living wage, because as I said, that's just covering the basics of what you need in order to survive.
Yeah.
The minimum wage is just basically whatever the capitalists in our society basically determine that they want to give you for the labor that you're doing,
Yeah.
which is often going to be way lower than what their profits are going to be that they're going to pocket at your expense.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like that's why I wanted to bring up this article, because again, it gives the illusion that Bernie is trying to do something, in the midst now that it's election season.
Yeah.
And Democrats haven't done shit really.
They
So,
can't do shit.
but
They're gonna get blocked everywhere.
right,
Like,
but at least they can say, "Oh, we tried to do it" or whatever,
and there's enough,
But
shittier Democrats that also are gonna vote no.
right,
So, but
so I would have made it would have made
whatever's.
more sense like as late as last year when there was actually control, and like if Biden really cared, kind of got like Manchin and Cinema in line to actually pass 15,
Yeah.
and other Democrats who like basically fell back because those two would kind of take the heat for them. That would have made a lot more sense then. But then even then, it's like, why didn't you push for 17 then?
Yeah.
Or better yet, more.
Right. I mean,
Like,
that's my thing. If you're not gonna get it, like, might as well go for broke. Like,
right.
So, but anyway.